Is inflation about to soar once again? Well, the latest figures released this morning are going to make for gloomy reading, I'm afraid, in the Treasury. Inflation up, shooting up actually, from 2.5% unexpectedly to 3% in the year to January. And I'm afraid the worst may be yet to come. Hello, I'm Adam Cherry and you're watching GB News Originals. So inflation is now a full percentage point above the Bank of England's target. Next week, Ofgem is set to hike the energy price cap once again, and in April, it will become more expensive for your employer to give you a pay rise or hire new staff. In other words, now how do we get here and what comes next? Well, it's tricky because Rachel Reeves insists that she's working to deliver economic growth and to put more money in people's pockets. Yeah, so far, all the warning lights are flashing on the dashboard. So what's really going on? Well, first of all, let's just cast your mind back to October 2024. Remember that bombshell budget, that £40 billion tax rising, sky high borrowing budget. We had inflation busting pay rises for public sector workers. We had a £25 billion national insurance raid on employers, which, by the way, hasn't even hit pay slips yet. So we can look forward to that. And of course, we had endless doomsaying from the cabinet saying that things could only get worse before they got better. Well, they're half right on that so far, aren't they? Now, today's announcement only makes things more tricky. Businesses are feeling the pinch and a record number of firms are on the brink of closure. Now, the Bank of England faces a very difficult choice. I don't envy them. Does it keep cutting interest rates and hope for a growth miracle to fall from the sky? I think we'd all like that, wouldn't we? Don't think it's going to happen though. Does it freeze interest rates or does it even raise them to stop what could be an inflationary spiral? Now, after today, it looks like your mortgage is staying more expensive for far longer. Sorry to be the bearer of the bad news, but there we are. Obviously, the Tories are lapping this up. They say all Brits are paying the price for Labour's action. Mel Stride, the shadow Chancellor, says the figures mean further pain for family finances, and it's thanks to the Labour Chancellor's record tax hikes and inflation-busting pay rises. Ed Davey, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, he's jumped in as well. The Chancellor's misguided policies are putting us at risk of a new era of stagflation. The economy still isn't growing, and now people are being hit in their pockets. The Conservative government plunged Britain into a cost of living crisis, and Labour's failures are just making the misery drag on and on. The government urgently needs to change course and take real action to get our economy growing strongly and bring down the cost of living. So that was Ed Davey there. Thank you very much, Ed, for that. So what does that mean for Rachel Reeves? Has her growth mission failed? Is she about to be given her P45 and escorted out of the doors of number 11? Well, I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because number 10 finally, admittedly after a lot of pestering from annoying political journalists, insisted that the Chancellor will stay in post for the remainder of this Parliament. Now, that's a luxury that's actually only afforded to the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, by the way. Presumably the rest of the cabinet need to watch their backs. But anyway, this is what Keir Starmer said when asked about Rachel Reeves' future. Take a look.
Pound is at a 14-month low against the dollar. So let me ask again, and can you please be clear, will Rachel Reeves be your Chancellor for the duration of this Parliament?
Rachel Reeves is doing a fantastic job. She has my full confidence. She has the full confidence of the entire party. She was given an incredibly challenging task at the budget because not only was the economy broken, but we had a £20 billion black hole and many, many things that had been identified for spending which didn't have any spending attached to them. So she took the tough decisions. She's right to take the tough decisions because as anybody who's turned around a business or organisation will know, if you're going to turn something around, you've got to take the tough decisions first. You can't identify a tough decision, then decide to put it off for 6 months or a year. Anybody turning around a business would never do that. So that's why we've taken the approach that we've taken. It's why we're taking the other steps that are necessary that go along with what was done in the budget. And I'm 100% confident we'll get the growth that we need. Thank you very much.
Right, well, there you have it. So even if inflation explodes, taxes soar through the roof and unemployment absolutely skyrockets, the Prime Minister has guaranteed Rachel Reeves is safe in her job. But to be fair, sacking a chancellor less than a year into a government wouldn't exactly take us to the land of milk and honey anyway. I think historically speaking, sacking a chancellor for any reason usually causes a political death spiral. I don't need to remind you of what happened just over 2 years ago with Liz Truss. I think we've all been there, done that. Let's not think about that again. So, Pat McFadden, if you're listening, I'm afraid you might have to remain in the wings practicing your budget speech for just a little bit longer. But, Keir Starmer does occasionally change his mind, so don't get too complacent. Things can only get marginally worse. Brace for impact. It's not looking pretty. Sorry to be the bearer of bad news, like I said, but there we go.
Tough for the Chancellor right now. It seems bad news after bad news after bad news, but there's been a bit of a shore-up Rachel operation.
Yeah, certainly. She had a really sort of rocky start to the year, with colleagues starting to brief against her, become slightly restless and unhappy, and feeling as though actually the briefings emanating out of the Treasury were far too negative. Speaking to sort of government sources, they say, we were told in the run-up to the budget in October that we were going to have to make difficult decisions and make potentially some quite unpopular cuts, but that was going to have to be the sort of hard and fast approach that we took right at the start to be able to rebuild after. Now, they say, in the run-up to the multi-year spending review, where government departments are going to be given their budgets for the next 3 years, they say that same message is emanating again. And so they are getting frustrated at the Treasury, and Rachel Reeves' position in all this, obviously, as well. There will be questions about how much policies she is responsible for have contributed to the headline inflation figures we heard today. You were discussing in the programme how private school fees rising by, I think, an average of 13% is part of the reason that inflation has now risen overall to 3%. How much also are the public sector pay rises that Rachel Reeves signed off on responsible for this inflation rise? Well, the Office for Budget Responsibility, after her last budget, said that it would rise as a result of some of Labour's policies. So she will have to wear some of the blame for this.
Yeah, and Aubrey, Ed Miliband's not in the clear either, is it? A reading that a lot of this inflation may have to do with energy costs as well.
Yeah, certainly. Energy costs were set to rise. The new price cap was announced yesterday. And Ed Miliband is one of those cabinet ministers, actually, who you do hear increasingly talked about in Labour circles as potentially one of those who is at risk at the next reshuffle. Now, we don't know when that is going to be. And actually, I think Sir Keir Starmer is very resistant to try and reshuffle his top team, certainly so early in his premiership within the first year. But then you look at May, and that's the point when people say there might be a kind of natural reset moment. And there are people around Sir Keir Starmer who say, he needs to go harder, faster, that there is potentially a sort of political purge that might be felt at sort of greater lengths come that reshuffle. And people like Ed Miliband, like Lisa Nandy, who are seen as being on the sort of soft left of the Labour Party, they might be at risk as well.
So it could be Ed rather than Reeves that goes.
Or perhaps one of Keir Starmer's oldest and longest friends, not just in politics, but in law, Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, who seems to really be facing pretty harsh briefings, not just from the Tory side, but actually from quite a few nameless cabinet ministers.
Yeah, certainly. Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, was brought in to the government and given a life peerage back in July when Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. And since then, the sort of anger emanating from cabinet ministers has been quite palpable. They say that he's basically sort of lowered the bar for them to be able to push through policies because of the risk of judicial review or sort of legal action being launched against the government. And they say that is stymieing the ability of ministers to sort of get on with their programme, because they say, this is a 5-year parliament, but it will tick down very, very quickly. We've already passed the 6 months point, and a year out from a general election, that's all anyone will be talking about. So the window of opportunity you have to do stuff is actually quite narrow. And so Lord Hermer has certainly found himself under the cosh. I think it's unlikely that Keir Starmer will want to be seen to give in to that pressure, both from the media and some of his colleagues as well, because having given him a life peerage last summer, to then throw him out of the cabinet but still have given him lawmaking powers for life would be quite controversial.
I'm Adam Cherry. Thank you very much for watching. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel for more.